Hello and welcome back to As an Aggregator. On this channel we like to mix it up. Sometimes we include videos, sometimes we include audio snippets. In this case we're talking about an entry that I had a discussion with ChatGPT, specifically the model was 4.0, and I said everything is a hypergraph reference. And I felt that this would be meaningful enough to bridge my understanding of what I think of as hypergraph references, along with relating it to YouTube as a cybernetic ecology and YouTube playlists. So let's begin by reading this excerpt. Everything is a hypergraph reference. Now, when you say that everything is a hypergraph reference, you are pointing to a view of reality in which every entity, every concept, object, or piece of content exists primarily as a set of relationships rather than as an isolated atom. In other words, what we conventionally think of as discrete things are really nodes in a vast hypergraph connected through edges that capture complex multi-way associations. By embracing this perspective, you shift attention away from the individual items and toward the pattern of connection that gives them meaning, right? So it's really saying that it's a semantic shift heuristic differential, if that's useful. Actually, let's play along with that. Semantic shift heuristic differential. Semantic Okay, so we're saying a semantic shift heuristic differential. So what are we saying? We're saying when we say that everything is a hypergraph, we're pointing to a view of reality in which every piece of content exists as a set of relationships rather than an isolated atom. Now, we conventionally think of things as discrete things in terms of nodes, in which the nodes are in a vast hypergraph connected through edges that capture complex multi-way associations. By embracing this perspective, you shift away from individual items and towards the pattern of connection that gives them meaning. Okay, so it's about shifting that perspective taking that one naturally has in terms of viewing things as discrete things and expanding that into nodes in a vast hypergraph. Continuing, a hypergraph differs from an ordinary graph in that its edges, often called hyperedges, can link more than two nodes simultaneously. In a typical graph, an edge represents a binary relationship. A is related to B. Now, in a hypergraph, a single hyperedge might connect A, B, C, and D all at once, signifying a collective association among them. If we think of YouTube content as a hypergraph, then any playlist, video, channel, or metadata tag becomes both a node and, at times, a hyperedge. A playlist is a hyperedge that gathers many videos into one relationship. A thematic tag is a hyperedge that groups videos sharing a concept. A channel itself is a hyperedge linking all of its uploads. Nothing stands alone. When everything is a hypergraph reference, even the act of naming or titling becomes a way of carving out hyperedges. For example, labeling a playlist Natural Science 5 Quick Pick, Culture Commentary 6 Quick Pick, or a ASAP Quick Pick not only identifies that playlist as a discrete node, but also implicitly points to the cluster of videos, topics, and tangential context that ties it together. Similarly, a video title or description doesn't merely describe the video's content. It references the network of concepts, subjects, related disciplines, analogous videos that the video inhabits. In this view, each video is both a node and part of multiple hyperedges. It becomes a temporal playlist, a category-specific playlist, and perhaps several ASAP playlists, and any derivative playlists that sprout from its themes. So what are we saying here? We're connecting this concept of a hypergraph, saying, hey, like normally an ordinary graph is that has its edges where it's link A related to B. Now in a hypergraph, a single hyperedge might connect A, B, C, and D all at once, signifying a collective association among them. Now this is important. Is it a vector or is it an edge? Is it a vector? Is it an edge? Is a video a specific vector? Or is a video an edge to a content creator you otherwise wouldn't have found? Is a playlist a simple vector, or is it an edge containing all of the videos contained within? This is where we expand this concept in our mind from a simple graph, an ordinary graph, to thinking about content in terms of a hypergraph. And this is crucial for playlist theory for content curators, as well as expanding your own mindset as a content consumer. And we scroll through this and we use the reference playlist to describe how these discrete nodes connect. Next, seeing everything as a hypergraph reference has profound implications for how you structure content. Rather than constructing linear hierarchies or strictly nested folders, you embrace a fluid model where any item can belong to multiple overlapping groups. A single video on quantum mechanics might reside in natural science category-specific quick pick, a temporal quick pick specifically for Monday for a specific quarter, or a quantum mechanics A to Z quick pick, or even a modern philosophy in natural science quick pick, or a quick pick related to a specific channel or category, or a beginner's curiosity playlist all at once. So all of these different playlists can have a single video related to it, and each of these collections constitutes a hyperedge that references that video. Conversely, the video itself encapsulates all the contexts in which it participates. The richness comes not from isolating it, but from tracing every hyperedge that points to it. So again, this goes back to the main topic where it's saying, and we're describing how a hypergraph reference, or more specifically seeing everything as a hypergraph reference, has profound implications for how you structure content. By embracing a fluid model where any item can belong to multiple overlapping groups. That's important in order to navigate the content that I curate, but also as you structure your own content for your own personal viewing. Next, in a cybernetic ecology, this hypergraphal lens highlights feedback loops and emergent structures. When a viewer searches, watches, or subscribes, they create new hyperedges, perhaps an implicit recommendation, because edge that links several videos in a way that the algorithm tries to capture. When you as a curator create a playlist, you are intentionally forging a hyperedge that guides future consumption. Over time, viewers traverse paths in this hypergraph, hopping from node to node along hyperedges that reflect shared themes, emotional resonance, or topical progression. Every click or engagement enriches the network, adding weight to certain hyperedges and possibly birthing new ones. By treating everything as a reference in a hypergraph, you emphasize the interdependence of all content. No video is truly complete on its own. It attains significance through the mesh of hyperedges that surround it. In practice, this means that your work as a curator and as a content consumer involves surfacing hidden connections, exposing latent hyperedges, and creating new ones. Your goal might be to maximize hypergraph saturation, to ensure that every concept, person, place, and idea has enough overlapping edges so that viewers can navigate organically through unexpected but meaningful pathways. This is the main crux of my work as an aggregator. To capture my hypergraph in a way that's navigatable, in a way that says, hey, so when one invokes a specific content creator or a specific content or concept, how can we say, okay, well, this can be cited in Culture Commentary 4. This can go back to Natural Science 2. This is a part of Esoteric 3. Or a specific temporal quick pick. Or a specific ASAP quick pick. In this month of June, in Q2 2025, I'm working on ASAP 15.3, a quick pick series. So this is really important, back to YouTube as a cybernetic ecology. Treating every reference in a hypergraph, everything as a reference in a hypergraph, we're emphasizing the interdependence of all content, right? No video is truly complete on its own. It attains significance through the mesh of hyperedges that surrounds it. That is the main work of a content curator. Continuing, ultimately, when everything is a hypergraph reference, you invite a worldview where the act of defining or labeling is synonymous with mapping relationships. Each label, each playlist, each tag becomes a lens that reveals a facet of the hypergraph rather than a fixed container. In this sense, the hypergraph is not just a theoretical model, but a practical tool for designing how knowledge and experience flow through YouTube's ecosystem. By embracing this, you can shift from thinking of content as silos to understanding it as a living, breathing network, where the true value lies in the connections, not the isolated nodes. And then the GPT followed up by saying, okay, so how might we want to apply this lens next? So this is for you at home consuming this. How might you seek to apply this concept next? Perhaps by identifying a few quiet hyperedges, those associations that exist in your mind but haven't yet been formalized in any playlist or tag, and then intentionally weaving them into your channel structure. Or maybe you'll look at your existing playlists and ask, what hyperedges are missing? What clusters of videos are not only tightly or lightly connected, and how could you strengthen those links so that viewers have more intuitive paths to follow? By continually asking how each piece of content participates in the broader hypergraph, you transform everything from a standalone video into a node with a dynamic interwoven system of references. And just as at the end of this video, we're going to click enter on semantic shift heuristic differential, spoken in first person as a response. Assume assume reading for YouTube video. And now it's going to write this in first person, and I'm going to read it just so we can get a sense of what's going on here. Oh, the writing style is informative. The idea I keep coming back to is something I call the semantic shift heuristic differential. It sounds abstract, but it's actually rooted in how we change the meaning of things over time, sometimes even without realizing it. Here's how I think of it. Let's say I start using a word or a phrase, something like curation or even content. At first, it has a clear reference. It points to a set of familiar practices or categories. But as I begin applying that word across more and more contexts, the meaning begins to shift, not randomly, but heuristically. The shift reflects patterns I've observed, new associations I've formed, or frameworks I've adopted. In other words, the language I use begins to encode the structure of my own evolving worldview. That shift, the delta between the original meaning and my adapted meaning, is what I'm calling the semantic shift heuristic differential. It's a measurement, not just of semantic drift, but of intentional repurposing. It tracks how a term that once meant X now means Y for me, because of how I've layered experience, observation, and repeated use. The key word here is heuristic. I'm not just redefining things arbitrarily. I'm using them as mental shortcuts, as functional units that help me navigate an increasingly complex content environment. Every time I repurpose a word like playlist or signal or edge, I'm not just being poetic or technical. I'm encoding relationships, workflows, and ways of seeing. That's what makes it a heuristic. It carries utility. Hashtag culture commentary, hashtag quick pick, hashtag YouTube as a cybernetic ecology. So when I say something like everything is a hypergraph reference, I'm not just naming a technical structure. I'm collapsing dozens of observations about content discovery, YouTube architecture, network theory, and psychology of attention into a single expression. That phrase carries a semantic shift heuristic differential because it doesn't mean what it meant before I started using it. It now acts as a compression mechanism for how I think. In practice, this means I have to be aware of the gap This means I have to be aware of the gap between how I use a term and how someone else might interpret it. If the differential is too wide, communication breaks down. But if I surface the heuristic, if I explain the shift, I can help others see the pattern and maybe even adopt the term in a new way. So this isn't about language changing over time. It's about tracking the intentional, functional shifts we make to language as we build new systems of thought. The semantic shift differential becomes a tool not just for communication, but for cognitive clarity. It shows me where meaning has moved and why. I hope this explanation and this digression into everything is a hypergraph reference provides you unique clarity into where we're moving forward on this channel in terms of playlist theory, not just for content curators, but also for content consumers.